The afternoon sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Grandview Country Club in Nashville, Tennessee, casting long shadows across the mahogany chess tables that lined the main salon. Margaret Chen, a 62-year-old real estate mogul who had built her fortune developing luxury condominiums across the Southeast, sat in her usual corner spot, surveying her domain with the satisfaction of someone who had never questioned their place at the top of the social hierarchy. She had been a member of this exclusive club for 35 years, ever since her late husband's family had sponsored her membership, and in all that time, she had maintained an undefeated record in the club's monthly chess tournaments. Not because she was exceptionally skilled, but because most members knew better than to challenge someone whose donations kept the club's aging infrastructure from crumbling. Across the room, 17-year-old Marcus Williams pushed a cleaning cart through the hallway adjacent to the salon, his movements efficient and practiced from 6 months of working as part of the club's maintenance crew. His mother, Denise Williams, had worked in the club's kitchen for 12 years, eventually becoming the head chef's assistant, a position that came with enough stability to keep their small household afloat after Marcus's father had passed away from cancer 5 years earlier. The job at the country club had been Denise's lifeline. A steady paycheck in a city where opportunities for single mothers without college degrees were increasingly scarce. And when Marcus had turned 17 and needed to contribute to their finances, she had called in every favor she had accumulated over the years to get him a position on the cleaning staff. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid better than the fast food restaurants his classmates worked at. And it came with the crucial benefit of allowing him to save money for the community college tuition he would need in the fall. Margaret noticed Marcus through the glass partition that separated the salon from the service corridor. And something about his presence irritated her in a way she couldn't quite articulate. Perhaps it was the way he carried himself with a quiet dignity, despite pushing a cleaning cart, or maybe it was simply that his youth reminded her of time passing and opportunities she had taken for granted in her own privileged upbringing. She turned to her companion, Robert Eastwood, the club's vice president and owner of a chain of car dealerships, and gestured dismissively toward the hallway. "The cleaning staff keeps getting younger," she remarked, with the casual cruelty of someone who had never had to work a service job in her life. "I remember when we only hired experienced professionals, not high school students who probably don't even know the difference between wax and polish." Robert, who had known Margaret for 20 years and understood her moods well enough to know when she was spoiling for some form of entertainment, glanced at Marcus and then back at the chessboard between them. "They do seem to be lowering their standards," he agreed, though his tone suggested he was merely playing along rather than genuinely agreeing. "Perhaps they're having trouble finding qualified applicants who are willing to work for what the club pays." It was a subtle jab at Margaret's consistent voting against raising staff wages at board meetings. But she either missed the implication or chose to ignore it. Instead, her attention had fixated on something else entirely, a leather-bound book that Marcus had placed on the lower shelf of his cleaning cart, visible through the glass. Margaret stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor with a sound that made several nearby members look up from their newspapers and quiet conversations. She walked purposefully toward the hallway door, her designer shoes clicking authoritatively against the marble, and pushed through into the service corridor where Marcus had paused to empty a waste bin. The boy looked up with the practiced politeness of someone who had learned early that maintaining employment meant being deferential to people who saw you as part of the furniture. "Yes, ma'am. Can I help you with something?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully neutral, revealing nothing of what he might be thinking behind his courteous expression. Margaret pointed at the book on his cart, her eyebrows raised in exaggerated surprise. "Is that a chess book?" she asked, her tone making it clear she found the very idea absurd. Marcus followed her gaze and nodded, his hand unconsciously moving to touch the worn cover of My System by Aaron Nimzowitsch, a classic chess strategy text he had purchased for $3 at a used bookstore downtown. "Yes, ma'am. I study chess when I have free time during my breaks," he replied simply, offering no elaboration because years of navigating spaces where he wasn't entirely welcome had taught him that volunteering too much information often led to complications. The revelation seemed to delight Margaret in a way that immediately set off warning bells in Marcus's mind. "You play chess," she repeated, her voice rising slightly so that Robert and several other members in the salon could hear through the open door. How wonderfully unexpected, she continued, and Marcus could hear the condescension dripping from every word like honey laced with poison. You know, we have quite a serious chess tradition here at the club, and I happen to be this year's reigning champion of our monthly tournaments. Perhaps you'd like to play a game with me right now. Just for fun, of course, so I can see what they're teaching young people about chess these days. Marcus felt the trap closing around him with the certainty of someone who had experienced this particular dynamic before. The setup where refusing would mark him as presumptuous or cowardly, while accepting would provide entertainment at his expense. He glanced toward the kitchen where his mother was working, knowing she would never forgive herself if his response to this situation cost him his job. And then back at Margaret Chen's expectant face, noting the cluster of club members who had now gathered in the salon doorway to witness whatever spectacle was about to unfold. His mind raced through his options. With the same analytical precision he applied to chess positions, weighing consequences and calculating the least damaging path forward. I appreciate the offer, Mrs. Chen, Marcus said carefully, buying himself a few seconds to think. But I'm currently on shift, and I wouldn't want to neglect my duties. Margaret waved her hand dismissively, as if brushing away an inconvenient insect. Nonsense. I'll clear it with management myself, she declared, clearly enjoying her power to disrupt his carefully maintained boundaries. Consider it a special educational opportunity, she added, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. After all, it's not every day that someone from your background gets to play chess in a facility like this. And who knows? You might actually learn something valuable. Robert had joined them in the hallway now, along with 3 other members including Patricia Montgomery, a retired federal judge, and James Liu, a surgeon at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. They formed a small audience that made the corridor feel suddenly claustrophobic, and Marcus realized with sinking certainty that there was no graceful way to decline without creating a situation that would follow him and his mother long after this moment had passed. Very well, he said quietly, his voice betraying none of the calculations running through his mind. I would be honored to play a game with you, Mrs. Chen, though I should mention that I'm still learning and wouldn't want to waste your time with an uncompetitive match. Margaret's laugh was sharp and self-satisfied. Don't worry about wasting my time, dear boy, she said, already turning back toward the salon. I find it quite amusing to see how different people approach the game, and besides, it will give me a chance to offer you some pointers that might help you improve. She gestured for him to follow, which Marcus did after carefully parking his cleaning cart in a corner where it wouldn't block the hallway, taking a moment to compose himself and remind himself of the lessons his mother had taught him about maintaining dignity in situations designed to strip it away. As he entered the salon for the first time since being hired, he was acutely aware of the eyes tracking his movement, the whispered comments that followed him like a wake, and the weight of assumptions settling onto his shoulders like a physical burden. The salon was decorated in the classical style that wealthy establishments favored when trying to evoke tradition and prestige. With dark wood paneling, oil paintings of previous club presidents, and furniture that prioritized appearance over comfort, Margaret led him to her preferred table near the windows, where an ornate chess set already sat waiting, its pieces carved from ivory and ebony in a style that probably cost more than Marcus's mother made in 3 months. She settled into the chair with the casual ownership of someone who had sat there hundreds of times before, while Marcus took the opposite seat with the careful awareness of someone entering unfamiliar territory where every action would be scrutinized and judged. Robert pulled up a nearby chair to observe, and within moments they were joined by Patricia, James, and 2 other members whose names Marcus didn't know, but whose expressions of amused curiosity he recognized all too well. Margaret made a show of setting up the pieces, explaining their positions with the patient condescension usually reserved for teaching small children, apparently assuming that Marcus's background meant he needed instruction in the basics. When she reached for the white pieces with the automatic entitlement of someone who had never been told no, Marcus didn't object, simply arranging his black pieces with a precision that caught Patricia's attention. The judge leaned forward slightly, her experienced eye noting how Marcus placed each piece exactly in the center of its square with the kind of careful attention that suggested familiarity rather than uncertainty. "Now then," Margaret began, her voice taking on the lecturing tone she probably used when addressing her real estate employees. "I'll go easy on you for the first few moves, so you can get comfortable, and please don't hesitate to ask questions if you need clarification about how certain pieces move or what strategies might be effective in different situations." Marcus nodded politely, his expression giving away nothing of the 8 years he had spent studying this game, the countless hours analyzing Grandmaster games on the broken laptop he had repaired himself, or the hundreds of tactical puzzles he had solved while other teenagers his age were scrolling through social media. He had learned long ago that underestimation could be a powerful advantage if you knew how to use it properly. Margaret played her opening move, e4, with confident flourish. "The king's pawn opening," she announced to their audience. "It's considered one of the most classical and principled ways to begin a game, controlling the center and allowing for rapid piece development." Marcus responded immediately with e5, the symmetric reply, and Margaret nodded approvingly, as if he had just successfully completed a basic test. "Very good," she said, her tone suggesting genuine surprise. "You do know the fundamentals at least, which is more than I expected, given your circumstances." She played knight f3, developing her knight toward the center, and Marcus could see her settling into a pattern she had probably played hundreds of times against opponents who didn't challenge her assumptions. Marcus played knight 6, developing his own knight, and as Margaret reached for her next piece, he allowed himself a brief memory of how he had first discovered chess 9 years earlier. He had been 8 years old, accompanying his mother to work during summer break because childcare was too expensive, and he had wandered into the club library while she was busy in the kitchen. There, on a high shelf he could barely reach, he had found a dusty chess set and an even dustier book titled Bobby Fischer Teaches Chess. He had taken both items to a quiet corner and spent the entire afternoon teaching himself the basic moves, captivated by the logical beauty of a game where success depended entirely on your own decisions rather than circumstances you couldn't control. When his mother found him hours later, he had been so engrossed that he hadn't noticed the library had closed around him, and instead of being angry, Denise had simply smiled and said that if he wanted to learn the game properly, they would find a way to make that happen. They had found that way through the public library's chess program, free lessons every Saturday morning taught by a retired postal worker named Mr. Henderson, who had once played competitively at the state level. For 3 years, Marcus had attended every single session, walking 45 minutes each way because bus fare would have eaten into their grocery budget, and absorbing everything Mr. Henderson could teach him about openings, middle game strategy, and endgame technique. When Mr. Henderson had finally told him that he had learned everything the program could offer and needed to find stronger competition to continue improving, Marcus had turned to books and online resources, spending his evenings after homework studying games by Kasparov, Carlsen, and Tal, memorizing patterns and principles until they became second nature. Margaret's voice brought him back to the present moment. "You're playing quite quickly," she observed, a hint of disapproval in her tone. In serious chess, one should take time to carefully consider each move and its implications several turns ahead. Marcus nodded politely but didn't slow down, because he had already calculated the next 15 moves of this particular line and knew exactly where Margaret's familiar pattern would lead if she continued following the basic principles she clearly relied upon. He played bc5, developing his bishop to an aggressive square, and watched as Margaret frowned slightly, perhaps beginning to sense that something about this game wasn't following the script she had anticipated. James Liu, who had played chess at Princeton 30 years earlier, straightened in his chair with sudden interest. "That's the Italian game," he murmured to Patricia. "Quite a sophisticated choice for someone supposedly still learning." Margaret shot him an irritated glance, clearly not appreciating commentary that might undermine her narrative, but she recovered quickly and played her next move with renewed confidence. "I'm familiar with this opening," she declared. "It's quite popular among intermediate players who don't yet understand the deeper strategic complexities of modern chess theory. Marcus allowed himself the smallest of smiles, knowing that the variation he was about to play had been introduced to top-level competition by Magnus Carlsen himself just 3 years earlier. The next 10 moves unfolded with a rhythm that gradually shifted the atmosphere in the room from amused curiosity to focused attention. Marcus continued to play almost instantly, each move executed with the confidence of someone following a well-studied plan, while Margaret's thinking time increased with each turn as she found herself in positions that didn't match any of the comfortable patterns she knew. Robert leaned over to Patricia and whispered something that made the retired judge raise her eyebrows and look at Marcus with new interest. And one of the unnamed members pulled out his phone, presumably to look up the position on a chess engine. Margaret's face had begun to show the first signs of stress, small lines appearing around her mouth as she concentrated harder than she had expected to need, for what she had anticipated would be a casual demonstration of superiority. Marcus could see her confidence wavering, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like the early stages of panic. And he felt no satisfaction in it, only a quiet determination to play the position honestly and let the pieces tell their own truth. This was the moment he had been preparing for during all those early mornings, studying before school, all those nights analyzing games, while his mother worked double shifts, all those hours of practice when he could have been doing anything else, but chose to invest in mastering this beautiful, unforgiving game. Patricia Montgomery, with the sharp, analytical mind that had served her well on the federal bench, was the first to fully grasp what was happening. "Robert," she said quietly, her voice carrying a note of wonder, "that young man isn't just competent. He's operating at a level that suggests serious study and genuine talent." Robert nodded, having reached the same conclusion himself, and Margaret heard the comment with a flash of something that looked like fear crossing her face before being quickly suppressed behind a mask of determined concentration. She played her next move after nearly 3 minutes of thought, and Marcus responded in 5 seconds, his knight landing on a square that created 3 different tactical threats simultaneously. The position on the board had transformed into something that looked nothing like the comfortable, controlling positions Margaret typically achieved in her club games. Instead, Marcus's pieces had woven a web of coordinated threats that limited her options with each passing move, and the realization that she was not just losing but being systematically outplayed settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Marcus watched her struggle with the complications he had created, and, for a brief moment, he felt something almost like sympathy, understanding that what she was experiencing wasn't just defeat in a game, but the collapse of assumptions she had built her self-image upon. But that sympathy was tempered by the memory of her condescending tone, her casual dismissal of his background, and the entertainment she had sought at his expense. And he pushed his next pawn forward with steady hands, knowing that the truth couldn't be gentle when it had been denied for so long. Margaret stared at the board with growing desperation, her manicured fingers hovering over different pieces as she searched for a move that wouldn't simply accelerate her decline. The salon had grown quiet except for the distant sounds of the kitchen staff preparing for the evening service, and the weight of that silence pressed down on everyone present with the uncomfortable intensity of watching something unravel that had seemed permanent just 30 minutes earlier. James Liu had abandoned any pretense of casual observation and now sat forward in his chair, his surgeon's eye recognizing the precision with which Marcus was dismantling Margaret's position, each move removing options like a skilled hand, carefully excising diseased tissue until only healthy truth remained. Finally, Margaret played Q2, a defensive move that attempted to consolidate her position and prevent the immediate tactical blow she could sense building in Marcus's coordination. Marcus responded with Ing4, attacking her exposed bishop, and Margaret's sharp intake of breath told everyone watching that she had not seen this possibility, despite it being the obvious continuation. She was forced to retreat her bishop awkwardly, disrupting the defensive formation she had been trying to construct. And as Marcus brought his rook to an open file with calm efficiency, Patricia Montgomery pulled out her own phone and began typing rapidly. Robert noticed and leaned over to see what the judge was doing, his eyebrows rising when he saw she was searching for local chess clubs and youth programs. her mind clearly working through implications that extended far beyond this single game. The position had reached a critical juncture where Margaret faced what chess players call a strategic zugzwang, a situation where any move she made would worsen her position, yet the rules required her to move nonetheless. She spent almost 5 minutes studying the board. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated, replaced by the tense focus of someone trying to find a lifeline in a situation that offered none. Marcus sat patiently, his posture relaxed but attentive, showing none of the triumphalism that Margaret had probably expected from someone in his position. Instead, he simply waited, knowing that the position would speak for itself without any need for additional commentary or demonstration. Finally, unable to find any move that didn't lead to further deterioration, Margaret looked up from the board and directly at Marcus for the first time since the game had begun. Her expression was complex, mixing embarrassment, anger, and something that might have been the first stirrings of genuine curiosity. "Who taught you to play like this?" she asked, her voice stripped of its earlier condescension, leaving only honest confusion. "This isn't the kind of chess you learn from casual practice or basic instruction, and I want to know where you received training that produced this level of understanding." Marcus considered his response carefully, aware that his answer would shape not just this moment, but potentially his future relationship with every person in this room. "I taught myself mostly," he said, simply. "My mother couldn't afford formal lessons, but the public library had free chess sessions on Saturday mornings when I was younger, and I studied every book I could find on the subject once I exhausted what those sessions could teach me. For the past 4 years, I've been working through Grandmaster games and solving tactical puzzles every day, usually for 3 or 4 hours after finishing my homework and before bed. And on weekends, I play online against opponents from around the world to test what I've learned against different styles and approaches." The statement landed like a stone dropped into still water, its ripples spreading outward through the gathered observers. Patricia Montgomery stopped typing and looked at Marcus with an expression that combined professional assessment with something approaching awe. 4 hours a day for 4 years, she repeated. Doing the mental mathematics. That's over 5,000 hours of dedicated practice, which according to research on expertise development, puts you well into the territory of genuine mastery in any field. And you did this entirely on your own initiative, without coaches or structured programs or the kind of resources that families with means typically provide for their talented children. Marcus nodded, slightly uncomfortable with the attention, but recognizing that honesty was more important than modesty in this moment. "My mother works as hard as any person I've ever known," he said quietly, his voice carrying a depth of emotion that made several people in the room look away briefly. "She never had the opportunity to go to college because she had to help support her own family, and when my father got sick, she took on extra shifts at multiple jobs to keep us afloat and make sure his medical bills didn't destroy us completely. After he passed, she kept working those extra hours to build up savings for my education, even though it meant I hardly saw her during the week. So when I discovered something I loved and was good at, I made a promise to myself that I would pursue it with the same dedication she showed in providing for us. And that meant treating chess not as a hobby, but as a discipline that demanded everything I could give it." The words hung in the air, recontextualizing everything that had happened in the past hour. Margaret's face had gone pale, the flush of embarrassment mixing with something that looked uncomfortably like shame. And she glanced toward the hallway where Marcus's cleaning cart still sat abandoned, a visible reminder of the assumptions she had made based on nothing more than his job title and the circumstances of his employment. Robert cleared his throat, clearly moved by Marcus's explanation, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of its earlier casual amusement. "Mrs. Chen," he said carefully, "I think perhaps we owe this young man an apology for the way this game was initiated and the assumptions that were made about his capabilities based on irrelevant factors." Margaret opened her mouth as if to protest, then closed it again, her eyes returning to the board where her position had deteriorated beyond any hope of salvation. "You're right," she said finally, the words clearly difficult for her to produce but genuine in their quiet delivery. "I made assumptions about you based on your job here and your age, and I invited you to play not because I respected you as a fellow chess enthusiast, but because I thought it would be amusing to demonstrate my superiority to someone I viewed as less capable. That was wrong, and I apologize for my disrespect and for putting you in a situation designed to be humiliating rather than genuinely competitive." Marcus accepted the apology with a simple nod, his expression neither forgiving nor condemning, simply acknowledging the words and moving forward. "Thank you for saying that, Mrs. Chen," he replied. "I accept your apology, and I hope we can finish this game in the spirit of mutual respect that chess deserves, because the beauty of this game is that the pieces don't care about our backgrounds or bank accounts or social positions. They only care about the quality of our thinking and the clarity of our vision." The game resumed, but the atmosphere had completely transformed. Margaret played with visible concentration now, no longer trying to prove anything but simply attempting to navigate the difficult position with as much dignity as possible. Marcus continued his systematic approach, his moves flowing naturally from the position's requirements rather than any desire to showboat or unnecessarily prolong his opponent's discomfort. Patricia had resumed typing, but now she was searching specifically for competitive chess opportunities and scholarship programs, her judicial mind already working through the unfairness of a system that nearly allowed genuine talent to go unrecognized and unsupported simply because it emerged from an unexpected source. 20 moves later, Marcus delivered checkmate with a queen and rook combination that was both elegant and inevitable. The kind of finish that demonstrated not just tactical skill but deep positional understanding. Margaret looked at the final position for a long moment, then extended her hand across the board in the traditional gesture of sportsmanship. "That was exceptional chess," she said, her voice steady despite the defeat. "I haven't been outplayed that thoroughly in years, and I certainly never expected it to come from someone I had so thoroughly underestimated based on factors that had nothing to do with the game itself." Marcus shook her hand, his grip firm but not aggressive. "You're a good player, Mrs. Chen," he said honestly. "Your opening knowledge is solid, and you understand basic strategic principles well. But chess at higher levels requires seeing further ahead and being willing to accept short-term discomfort for long-term advantage, which is actually a lesson that applies to life as much as it does to the 64 squares." James Liu stood up, clearly energized by what he had witnessed. "Young man, I'm on the board of directors for the Tennessee Chess Association, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that you should be competing in state and national tournaments." He pulled out his business card and handed it to Marcus with the seriousness of someone making an important professional connection. "I want you to contact me tomorrow so we can discuss getting you registered for upcoming competitions and potentially connecting you with coaches who work with players at your level. You have genuine talent that deserves to be developed and recognized, and I suspect you could go far in competitive chess if given proper support and opportunities." Patricia added her own card to the growing collection in Marcus's hand. "I'm going to make some calls to people I know in youth development and scholarship programs," she said, her judge's demeanor making it clear this was not a casual offer, but a commitment she intended to follow through on. There are resources available for talented young people from underserved communities, and you absolutely qualify for consideration. Additionally, I want to connect you with the National Chess Educators Association, which specifically works to identify and support promising players who might not have access to traditional chess education pathways. Margaret sat silently through these exchanges, watching as the young man she had intended to use for entertainment became the center of genuinely interested attention from people whose respect actually meant something. When the conversation paused, she spoke up again, her voice different from anything Marcus had heard from her before. "I want to make this right," she said, looking directly at Marcus rather than at the board or the other members. "Not because it will make me feel better about my behavior, but because it's the right thing to do and because you deserve support regardless of my previous actions. I'm going to establish a scholarship fund at the club, specifically for children of staff members who demonstrate exceptional talent in any field, and I want you to be the first recipient with no strings attached except that you use the money to pursue your passion for chess and your education." Robert looked at Margaret with surprise, clearly not having expected this offer, and Marcus himself seemed uncertain how to respond. Patricia nodded approvingly. recognizing genuine contrition when she saw it from years of evaluating character in her courtroom. "I appreciate that offer, Mrs. Chen," Marcus said carefully, "but I need to think about it and discuss it with my mother before accepting anything. She's taught me to be cautious about accepting help that might come with unspoken expectations or obligations. And while I believe your offer is genuine, I want to make sure I understand all the implications before making any commitments." Margaret smiled, a real smile this time rather than the sharp expression she had worn earlier. "That's exactly the kind of thoughtful response that confirms you deserve every opportunity that comes your way," she said. "Take all the time you need to consider it, and please know that the offer stands regardless of your decision, because my obligation to make this right isn't dependent on your acceptance." She stood up, gathering her things with movements that suggested fatigue rather than the confident energy she had displayed an hour earlier. "I think I need to go home and think seriously about how I've been conducting myself and what kind of person I want to be moving forward." As Margaret left the salon, the remaining members clustered around Marcus, their questions and offers of support flowing so quickly that he struggled to keep track of them all. Robert wanted to introduce him to a friend who ran a local chess club. James was already texting colleagues about upcoming tournament opportunities. Patricia was making notes about scholarship programs and mentorship possibilities. In the space of a single chess game, Marcus had gone from anonymous cleaning staff to the center of attention, and while part of him felt overwhelmed by the sudden shift, another part recognized this as the kind of opportunity his mother had always told him to be ready for. The moment when preparation met chance and created possibility. The sound of his cart being moved drew Marcus's attention to the hallway, where he saw his mother standing with her hands on the handle. Her expression, a mixture of pride, concern, and the protective worry that had defined her approach to parenting since his father's death. She had heard about the chess game from other kitchen staff and had come to check on him, ready to intervene if necessary but hoping she wouldn't need to. Marcus excused himself from the conversation and walked over to her, noting how the other members watched the interaction with interest rather than the dismissive indifference they might have shown before witnessing his chess prowess. "Mom," Marcus said quietly, "I need to tell you what just happened." Denise smiled, her eyes glistening slightly. "Sweetheart, I've been hearing about it for the last 20 minutes from everyone who walked through the kitchen. And all I can say is that I hope you showed them the respect they didn't initially show you." Marcus nodded. "I did, and more importantly, I showed them what you've always taught me, that our worth isn't determined by other people's assumptions, but by our own actions and the dedication we bring to everything we do." Patricia approached them, introducing herself and explaining her role as a federal judge and her serious interest in helping Marcus access competitive chess opportunities. Denise listened carefully, asking pointed questions about expectations and commitments, her protective instincts on full display as she evaluated whether these offers represented genuine support or potential complications. After several minutes of conversation, she turned to Marcus and spoke the words that would change everything. "If these people are serious about helping you pursue chess at a higher level, then I think you should explore those opportunities. But remember that your education comes first, and chess is a path to better yourself, not an end in itself." The conversation continued for another hour, with more members joining as word spread through the club about what had happened. Plans began to take shape for Marcus to attend his first competitive tournament in 2 weeks, to meet with a master-level coach the following weekend, and to apply for several scholarship programs that could provide financial support for his chess development and college education. Through it all, Marcus maintained the same calm dignity he had shown during the chess game, answering questions thoughtfully and making no promises he wasn't certain he could keep. As closing time approached and the salon gradually emptied, Marcus returned to his cleaning cart and resumed his duties, finishing the shift he had been pulled away from. Robert stopped him as he was about to enter the hallway. "You know you don't need to finish cleaning tonight," he said kindly. "I think we can make an exception, given the circumstances." Marcus shook his head politely. "I appreciate that, Mr. Eastwood, but I was hired to do a job, and I take that responsibility seriously, regardless of what else might have happened today. My mother taught me that half-finished work reflects poorly on your character, and I'm not about to disappoint her by leaving tasks undone. Robert watched him push the cart down the hallway, then turned to Patricia, who had stayed behind to make a few final calls. "That young man is going places," he said with certainty. "Not just because he can play chess, but because he understands something fundamental about dignity and responsibility that many people never learn." Patricia nodded her agreement. "The question now is whether we can create a system that recognizes and supports that kind of talent and character before it gets buried under economic necessity and limited access to opportunities, because for every Marcus Williams who gets discovered by chance, there are probably hundreds of talented young people who never get that lucky break." As Marcus cleaned the last of the windows, he allowed himself to think about the possibilities that had opened up in the course of a single afternoon, but he grounded those thoughts in the practical reality his mother had taught him to maintain. Opportunities were worthless without the work ethic to capitalize on them, and recognition meant nothing if it didn't translate into concrete improvements in his and his mother's circumstances. Tomorrow he would still wake up at 5 in the morning to study chess before school, still work his shift at the country club with the same diligence he had shown before, and still maintain the grades that would give him options regardless of how the chess opportunities developed. But now, for the first time, he could see a path forward that might allow him to pursue his passion while also building a stable future. And that possibility felt more valuable than any trophy or title could ever be. 3 months had passed since that transformative afternoon in the Grandview Country Club salon, and Marcus Williams found himself sitting in a hotel conference room in Memphis, preparing for the final round of the Tennessee State Chess Championship. He had progressed through 5 previous rounds with a record of 4 wins and 1 draw, putting him in second place overall and paired against the top seed, a 24-year-old graduate student from Nashville who had won the state title 3 years running. The room buzzed with the focused energy of serious competitors, the clicking of chess clocks and the scratch of pencils recording moves, creating a soundtrack that Marcus had come to associate with the pursuit of excellence rather than simple entertainment. His journey to this moment had been anything but smooth, despite the initial enthusiasm and support from the country club members. The scholarship fund Margaret Chen had established proved genuine, providing him with $2,000 that had gone toward chess books, tournament entry fees, and a membership to an online chess training platform that gave him access to grandmaster-level instruction and analysis tools. Patricia Montgomery had followed through on every promise, connecting him with the Tennessee Chess Association and 3 different scholarship programs for talented students from underserved communities. James Liu had introduced him to Coach Raymond Mitchell, a former national master who agreed to work with Marcus twice a week, refining his opening repertoire and teaching him the psychological aspects of competitive play that no book could fully convey. But success in tournament chess required more than just talent and access to coaching, as Marcus had quickly discovered during his first competitive events. The chess world had its own culture and unspoken rules, a complex social ecosystem where knowing the right people and understanding tournament etiquette proved almost as important as knowing the right moves. Many of his opponents came from families who had been involved in competitive chess for generations, players who had attended chess camps and traveled to international tournaments and built networks of training partners and coaches that gave them advantages Marcus was only beginning to access. He had lost several games in his early tournaments, not because he was outplayed on the board, but because he was outmaneuvered in time management, a crucial skill that came from experience rather than study. Denise had watched her son's rapid immersion into competitive chess with a mixture of pride and concern, worried that the sudden attention might pull him away from his education or create unrealistic expectations about chess as a career path. She had attended his tournaments whenever her work schedule permitted, sitting in the audience section and watching with an intensity that made other parents smile in recognition of shared parental investment. After each game, win or loss, she would wait patiently for Marcus to finish recording his moves and analyzing with his opponent, and then they would drive home together discussing not just the chess, but the life lessons embedded in the experience, the importance of grace in victory and resilience in defeat, the value of learning from mistakes rather than dwelling on them. The current tournament had pushed Marcus to his limits in ways that previous competitions hadn't, facing opponents who knew his games and had prepared specifically to counter his preferred openings. In round 3, he had faced a 16-year-old from Knoxville who had studied all of Marcus's previous tournament games and launched a surprise attack in an opening Marcus had considered his strength. He had survived that game only by finding a defensive resource in the late middle game that his opponent had overlooked, converting a difficult position into a drawn endgame through precise calculation. In round 4, he had faced a college professor who played with the patience of someone who had been competing for 30 years, slowly outmaneuvering Marcus in a strategic battle that came down to a single pawn race in the endgame. Marcus had won that game, but it had taken every ounce of his concentration and cost him an hour and a half on his clock for a game that lasted nearly 5 hours. Now, facing the defending champion, with both players needing a win to have a chance at the title, Marcus felt the weight of all the expectations that had accumulated over the past 3 months. Margaret Chen had driven up from Nashville to watch the final round, sitting quietly in the back of the room alongside Patricia Montgomery and Robert Eastwood, a show of support that meant more to Marcus than they probably realized. Coach Mitchell sat in the audience section as well, his experienced eyes ready to spot opportunities and mistakes that Marcus would only see after the game when they reviewed it together. And his mother sat in the front row, her hands clasped together in her lap, her expression calm, despite the anxiety Marcus knew she must be feeling. The tournament director announced the start of the round, and 60 chess clocks began ticking simultaneously as players made their first moves. Marcus's opponent, Stephen Chen, no relation to Margaret despite the shared surname, opened with his typical 1d4, a solid choice that had served him well throughout the tournament. Marcus had prepared specifically for this possibility, working with Coach Mitchell to develop a defense that would take the game into complex, unbalanced positions where both players would need to calculate precisely rather than relying on memorized patterns. He played the King's Indian defense, a response he had learned just 2 weeks earlier specifically for this potential matchup, and watched Stephen's eyebrows rise slightly in surprise at the unexpected choice. The opening phase of the game unfolded with both players following theoretical lines up to move 12, at which point Marcus introduced a novelty, a new move that wasn't in the existing database of master games. It was a pawn sacrifice that aimed to open lines against Stephen's king before he could complete his development, a sharp tactical idea that Coach Mitchell had suggested but warned carried significant risk if Marcus miscalculated any of the resulting variations. Stephen thought for 18 minutes on his response, a clear indication that he had been taken out of his preparation and was navigating unfamiliar territory. When he finally captured the pawn, accepting the challenge, Marcus could see the determination in his opponent's eyes, the competitive fire that had made Stephen a 3-time champion. The game transformed into a tactical melee, both players launching attacks on opposite sides of the board in a race to see whose threats would materialize first. Marcus's pieces swarmed around Stephen's king, his rooks and minor pieces coordinating in patterns he had practiced hundreds of times in tactical puzzles, but never before executed successfully in a crucial tournament game. Stephen's queenside attack crashed forward with its own menacing power, his pawns rolling down the board supported by heavy pieces that threatened to overwhelm Marcus's defenses. The position grew so complicated that neither player could calculate all the variations with certainty, and both were forced to rely on intuition and pattern recognition developed through years of study and practice. At move 23, Marcus found himself facing a critical decision. He could sacrifice his exchange, giving up a rook for a bishop to maintain his attack, or he could retreat and consolidate his position, accepting a slight disadvantage, but maintaining material equality. Coach Mitchell had drilled into him the importance of being true to the position's requirements rather than following general principles. And as Marcus studied the board, he could see that retreat would allow Stephen to complete his development and coordinate his pieces in a way that would neutralize Marcus's attacking chances. The sacrifice was risky, requiring precise calculation for the next 8 moves. But it was the kind of decision that separated good players from great ones, the willingness to trust your preparation and commit fully to a chosen path. Marcus lifted his rook, paused for 3 seconds to verify his calculation one final time, and placed it on the square where Stephen's bishop could capture it. The tension in the room became palpable as spectators realized something significant was happening, and several experienced players stood up to move closer to the board, trying to see what Marcus had calculated. Stephen stared at the position for 12 minutes, his expression cycling through surprise, concern, and, finally, grim determination, as he realized he had to accept the sacrifice or find himself in an even worse position. He captured the rook, and Marcus's response came instantly, his queen swooping into an attacking position that created multiple threats simultaneously. The following moves unfolded with the inevitability of a forced sequence, each player executing their only viable option as the tactical complications resolved into a clear advantage for Marcus. Stephen fought with the tenacity of a champion, finding the best defensive resources available and making Marcus prove every step of his advantage. But the position's momentum had shifted decisively. At move 31, with Marcus's pieces coordinated for a final assault and his own king position collapsing under pressure, Stephen extended his hand in resignation, acknowledging defeat with the grace of someone who recognized when they had been legitimately outplayed. The room erupted in applause, not just from the supporters who had come to watch Marcus, but from other competitors and spectators who appreciated the quality of chess they had just witnessed. Coach Mitchell's broad smile told Marcus everything he needed to know about the technical quality of his play, but it was his mother's tears of pride that truly confirmed the significance of what he had just accomplished. Patricia Montgomery was already on her phone, presumably calling contacts about the scholarship implications of a state championship victory. Margaret Chen stood with her hands clasped together, her expression showing the genuine joy of someone who had played a part in another person's success. The tournament director confirmed the final standings after the last games concluded, announcing that Marcus Williams, at 17 years old, had won the Tennessee State Chess Championship with a score of 5 wins and 1 draw, making him the youngest state champion in over 2 decades. The prize included a modest cash award, qualification for the U.S. Chess Federation's national championship, and perhaps most importantly, the kind of credential that would transform scholarship applications from hopeful submissions into serious considerations. As Marcus accepted his trophy, a heavy crystal piece that caught the afternoon light streaming through the conference room windows, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. From that first dusty chess set in the country club library to this vindication of years of dedication and sacrifice. The celebration afterward was subdued by Marcus's standards, but meaningful in its sincerity. Coach Mitchell took him aside to discuss next steps, laying out a training plan for the national championship and talking about the possibility of Marcus pursuing chess seriously in college through one of several universities that offered both strong academic programs and competitive chess teams. Patricia had concrete information about 3 different scholarship programs that specifically sought state champions from underrepresented backgrounds, each offering full tuition plus living expenses at major universities. Robert Eastwood presented Marcus with a check from the country club's newly established talent development fund, enough money to cover travel expenses for the next year of competitions. Margaret approached last, her earlier confidence replaced by something that looked like humble satisfaction. She handed Marcus an envelope with his name written in careful script. "This isn't part of the scholarship fund," she said quietly. "It's a personal gift to acknowledge the lesson you taught me about assumptions and respect, and to say thank you for having the grace to accept my apology and allow me to be part of your journey." Marcus opened the envelope to find a check for $5,000, along with a handwritten note that began, "To a true champion, not just in chess, but in character." But the moment that meant most to Marcus came later that evening, after the celebrations had ended and the other competitors had departed for their homes. He sat in the hotel room with his mother, both of them processing the day's events in comfortable silence. And Denise finally spoke the words that had been building throughout the afternoon. "Your father would have been so proud of you today," she said softly, her hand reaching for his. "Not just because you won the championship, but because of the person you've become. Someone who took every disadvantage and transformed it into motivation, who faced people's doubts and low expectations with quiet determination rather than anger, and who never forgot where you came from or the people who sacrificed to help you get here. Marcus felt tears forming, the emotional weight of the day finally breaking through the competitive focus he had maintained throughout the tournament. "I did it for both of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every hour I spent studying when I could have been doing something easier. Every time I pushed through exhaustion or frustration or doubt, I thought about Dad working those extra shifts when he was already sick, and about you taking on more responsibilities to keep us stable. This championship isn't just mine, it's ours, because none of this happens without everything you both gave me." They sat together as the evening light faded from the windows, mother and son, bound by shared sacrifice and mutual understanding of what this victory represented beyond the trophy and the title. It was validation that talent could overcome circumstance when combined with dedication and opportunity. Proof that assumptions based on background or appearance or job title were worse than useless. They were actively harmful in preventing recognition of excellence wherever it emerged. Marcus had entered that country club 3 months earlier as anonymous cleaning staff, underestimated and dismissed by people who saw only his position rather than his potential. He had left that salon as someone whose abilities could not be ignored, whose character had impressed people accustomed to evaluating others, and whose story had already begun changing minds about the nature of talent and the importance of looking beyond surface assumptions. The national championship 3 months later brought Marcus to a convention center in St. Louis, where he faced competitors from every state, many of them products of elite chess academies and expensive private coaching. He finished in the top 20, a remarkable achievement for someone with less than a year of competitive experience, and his games were analyzed in chess publications that praised his creative attacking style and fearless tactical play. The scholarship offers that followed allowed Marcus to choose from 6 different universities, each offering full financial support along with access to their chess programs and academic resources. He ultimately chose Stanford. Attracted by their engineering program and their chess team's reputation for developing players who competed at the international level, Margaret Chen's scholarship fund grew beyond its initial modest scope, eventually supporting 12 children of Grandview Country Club employees in pursuing their talents in fields ranging from music to mathematics to athletics. She became a vocal advocate for youth development programs and used her business connections to raise awareness about the importance of identifying and supporting talented young people regardless of their economic background. The transformation in her own perspective became a case study in how personal experience could challenge and change even deeply held prejudices when people were willing to confront their own assumptions honestly. Coach Mitchell continued working with young players from underserved communities, using Marcus's story as both inspiration and practical example of what dedicated training could achieve when combined with natural talent and strong character. He established a free chess program in partnership with the Nashville Public Schools, creating pathways for other talented young players to access competitive chess without the financial barriers that had nearly kept Marcus from developing his abilities. The program identified and supported 15 additional state competitors in its first 3 years, proving that Marcus's success was not an isolated anomaly, but evidence of untapped talent waiting for opportunity. Patricia Montgomery's advocacy for educational equity took on new dimensions as she incorporated lessons from Marcus's experience into her work on youth justice and opportunity initiatives. She became a sought-after speaker on the importance of recognizing talent in unexpected places and challenging the systemic assumptions that prevented many capable young people from accessing resources that wealthier peers took for granted. Her federal court rulings began reflecting an even stronger commitment to ensuring that background and circumstance didn't predetermine outcomes in cases involving young defendants looking for opportunities to redirect promising lives, rather than simply processing them through a system that often failed to see their potential. 5 years after that transformative chess game in the Grandview Country Club salon, Marcus Williams graduated from Stanford with degrees in computer science and mathematics, having competed successfully on their chess team, while maintaining a 3.8 gigapascals. He turned down lucrative job offers from major tech companies to instead launch a nonprofit organization dedicated to identifying and supporting talented young people from underserved communities across multiple disciplines. The organization used chess as an entry point, but expanded to encompass academic tutoring, mentorship programs, and scholarship assistance for students who demonstrated exceptional ability and dedication regardless of their economic circumstances. Denise Williams attended her son's college graduation with pride that had been earned through years of sacrifice and unwavering support, watching as he received not only his degree but also recognition as one of Stanford's most impactful students for his work in educational equity. She had continued working at the country club throughout Marcus's college years, eventually becoming the food service director, a promotion that reflected both her own competence and the changed culture that had gradually emerged following that afternoon, when assumptions were challenged and found wanting. She remained close with several of the members who had witnessed Marcus's game against Margaret, maintaining relationships built on mutual respect rather than the service provider dynamic that had previously defined those interactions. The chessboard from that original game was donated to Marcus's nonprofit organization, displayed in their main office with a small plaque explaining its significance. The board where assumptions were defeated and possibilities were revealed. Marcus used it when teaching new students, explaining that chess's greatest lesson wasn't about moving pieces, but about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to recognize the strategic depth that might lie beneath. Every student who entered the program learned the story of that game, not as mythology, but as practical example of how preparation, meeting opportunity, could create transformation when character and dedication supported natural talent. Margaret Chen's journey took perhaps the most surprising turn of all the people touched by that afternoon. She sold 2 of her luxury condo developments and used the proceeds to establish a foundation focused on workforce development and educational opportunity for children of service workers across the hospitality industry. The foundation provided scholarships, training programs, and career development resources for thousands of young people whose parents worked in hotels, restaurants, and country clubs, ensuring that their talents would have chance to develop regardless of their starting circumstances. She served on the board alongside Denise Williams, the 2 women having developed an unlikely friendship built on honest acknowledgement of past wrongs and shared commitment to creating better pathways for future generations. The story of Marcus Williams and his chess game against Margaret Chen became a frequently cited example in discussions about recognizing talent and challenging assumptions. Written about in business journals and education publications as a case study in the cost of prejudice and the value of maintaining openness to excellence from unexpected sources. But for Marcus himself, the most important outcome was not the publicity or the opportunities or even the championship titles he eventually accumulated. It was the knowledge that his success had created pathways for others, that the door opened for him by a combination of his own ability and the support of people willing to challenge their assumptions could remain open for other talented young people who needed only opportunity to demonstrate what they were capable of achieving. On the 10th anniversary of that chess game, the Grandview Country Club held a special event honoring both Marcus Williams and the scholarship fund that had grown from Margaret Chen's initial attempt to make amends. Marcus returned to give a speech, standing in the same salon where he had once pushed a cleaning cart and played the game that changed his life. He talked about the importance of recognizing that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity does not. About the responsibility of those with resources to create pathways rather than barriers, and about the fundamental truth that chess had taught him, that every person deserves to be evaluated based on their actual capabilities rather than assumptions derived from irrelevant factors. As he concluded his remarks, Marcus set up that original chessboard one more time, arranging the pieces in the final position from his game against Margaret. "This position represents more than just a checkmate," he said to the assembled members and scholarship recipients. "It represents the moment when one person's assumptions met reality and had to yield, when talent that had been dismissed found its voice, and when a community began the difficult work of examining its own biases and creating better systems. None of us can change the past, but all of us can choose to build a future where young people's potential is recognized and supported regardless of their starting point, and where excellence is celebrated wherever it emerges." The applause that followed was genuine and sustained, recognition not just of Marcus's words, but of the living proof he represented that transformation was possible when people committed to growth rather than clinging to comfortable assumptions. Margaret Chen, now 72 years old, stood with tears in her eyes, thinking about how a single afternoon had redirected not just one young man's trajectory, but her own understanding of what truly mattered in measuring a person's worth. She had learned through humbling experience that true nobility came not from wealth or position but from character demonstrated through action, and that sometimes the greatest gift one could receive was the opportunity to recognize and correct one's own blindness before it caused irreparable harm. As the event concluded and people gathered in small groups to continue conversations, Marcus found himself back at that chessboard, now surrounded by young scholarship recipients eager to hear more details about the game itself. He walked them through the key positions, explaining not just the tactical combinations, but the mental discipline required to find and execute them under pressure. These young people, from backgrounds similar to his own, listened with the focused attention of students, recognizing lessons that extended far beyond the 64 squares, and in their eyes Marcus saw a reflection of his own younger self, that teenager who had dared to believe that dedication could overcome disadvantage and that excellence, once proven, could not be ignored. The sun set over Nashville as the event gradually dispersed, but the legacy of that afternoon 10 years earlier continued to ripple outward through lives transformed and systems questioned. Marcus Williams had proven that a single game could indeed change everything. Not through magic or luck, but through the intersection of preparation, opportunity, and the courage to demonstrate one's worth in the face of doubt. And in doing so, he had given countless others permission to pursue their own excellence with the same dedication, knowing that talent ultimately speaks louder than any assumption, and that character revealed through action carries more weight than any predetermined judgment based on circumstance or appearance. The chess pieces were carefully packed away for another day, but the lessons they had taught remained active and growing, spreading through communities and institutions as more people learned to look beyond surface assumptions and recognize the strategic depth of human potential wherever it might emerge. That, Marcus reflected as he drove home that evening, was the true checkmate, not defeating an opponent on the board, but transforming a system of thinking that had confined too many talented young people for too long, and replacing it with a commitment to recognizing and nurturing excellence, regardless of where it appeared or who embodied it. The end.